To start, let's remove this engine cover, and the first thing I want to do is go through this little slot right here. You see I'll have my ratchet. There's a clamp right here that connects the intake, which is part of this engine cover, to the throttle body, and with an 8mm socket you can loosen up the clamp if you go just at the right angle in here. Loosen it up enough to be able to unlatch the cover and the tubing there from the throttle body. I'm going to undo this clamp here as well. Take this and pull it back. Okay, remove the oil fill cap, set that aside. Now you can take the engine cover, pull it up, get it out of the way. There's a hose attached to it right here. Pull the clamp off, break the hose free, and disconnect it. Now you can set this aside. I like to put the oil fill cap back, that way no debris can make its way in here. Next, let's unplug the ignition coil. It has this little lock on the connector. You don't have to pop it all the way out like this, just halfway out. And then you can press down on the tab and remove the connector. With a 10mm socket, let's unbolt the ignition coil. Now you can pull it straight up and out. At this point, you want to do the same to the rest of the ignition coils. Next, let's disconnect the rest of this hose. And just move this one out of the way so you can get to these bolts that hold on the valve cover. At the back here, take the harness for the ignition coils and just move that out of the way so that you're clear. One last thing to do is to disconnect the two VVT solenoids. So unplug the connectors, set the wiring aside, and then they're held on by a 10mm bolt each. So go ahead and remove those. And remember that the white one was at the front for the intake and the black one was on the back side for the exhaust. To remove these, it might be a little tricky. You're going to have to pull straight up and kind of wiggle as it comes up. It will be a little bit stuck in here. Well, these are putting up a fight, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbolt the valve cover, and with the valve cover loose, hopefully I can get these out of here. So I'm going to loosen up all the valve cover bolts. I'm going to start on one side and just work my way to the other side. Break them free first, and then go around and remove them completely. There we go. Lift this up. Set this aside. And now you can see the reason I wanted to remove those two solenoids is so that I can clean that area as well as I can so that the gasket can seal up. But with the valve cover out of the way, I can give these a couple twists and they should slide right out. Now, remember which is which, like I said. There we go. And now we can do some cleanup. What you want to do is clean this area up. As you can see, it's very gunky in there. Make sure you don't put any debris inside of these two holes or inside the spark plug tubes. And then you want to do the same to this outer part. Just take a rag or a razor blade, whatever works for you, and clean it all up. The surfaces here are actually very clean. There isn't a whole lot to clean up, to be honest. So I'm just going to wipe the majority of the debris and the oil off, and then we can just put on a new gasket. And very carefully cutting the grommet, slicing it in half basically. There we go, and that's how you remove it. And you take the new one, and this one just slides right on like this. And to put it back in, you just press it into place until you feel that it's fully seated. Just like that. And then you repeat the process for all the bolts that are on here. I'm going to do that in a second. For now, I'm going to show you how to get these gaskets off, which is pretty easy. You just pull these up like that. There are also grommets on here where the ignition coils bolt on. They work the same way. You have to pull the grommet off and slide the new one on. I'll leave this for later. For now, I'm going to inspect the area, make sure it's clean. If it's not, you can go ahead and wipe it off with a rag. But for me, this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to take my new gasket and just place it right on. It goes in a specific direction, so you'll notice that right around this ring here has a groove, whereas on the other side it's flat. The groove faces up, so I can go around this insert for the ignition coil bolt. Press the gasket on into place, just like that, and do the same for the main outer gasket. Go ahead and pull it straight up. Inspect the area. It's very clean. Lay the gasket down on here, line it up, and just press it down into place. So now all I have left to do is to finish swapping the grommets on everything, and then we can reinstall. Now you want to take your valve cover with the new gaskets, flip it over, and make sure that the gasket stays in place. It should, but you never know. And then very gently slide it into position. Make sure the gasket doesn't fall off. Drop it down, and it lines up perfectly for me. That's great. The gasket is still seated. Okay, let's start in a few of the bolts. I'm not tightening, I'm just bottoming them out so that I can get them close. Okay, so now they're all bottomed out. That's perfect. The torque spec for this valve cover is 89 inch-pounds. I'm going to work my way from the center outward. So I'm going to start over here and then just go across to this one, back to this one, across, 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 and so on. Before I do that though, I'm going to make sure that they're all nice and snug, otherwise I'll be ratcheting the torque wrench for a while. Now I'm just going to double check them all. This time you don't have to go in a sequence, you can just go in a circle and double check them. All right, they're all tight. Next I'm going to put in the two variable valve timing solenoids. Go ahead and oil up the O-ring gasket if you wish to do so, or even replace it. Might be a good idea. Mine are in very good condition, so I'm not going to worry about that. But drop them both down, make sure they're fully seated. Start in the two bolts. Okay, these also get torqued to 89 inch-pounds if you want it to torque them. Go ahead and plug them in. Make sure that the connection clicks. This one for me is kind of broken, but you know, it still holds on there. Secure the wiring wherever it needs to be secured. Let's put this hose back in. You can add a little bit of silicone paste right here. This will do two things. It will insulate and make sure that water doesn't get in the electrical connector here for the spark plug, and it will also ensure that the boot doesn't stick to the spark plug with all the heat cycles that it has to go through. So I'll just add a little bit like that. Now you want to take your ignition coil, drop it down into its appropriate cylinder, slide the bolt in, snug it up, and now let's torque it to 89 inch-pounds. It's important to at least tighten it properly, if not torque it, because these bolts actually help hold down the valve cover as well, and that's why there's a rubber grommet here to insulate and make sure that oil doesn't come out. So if it's not properly tightened, if it's left too loose, oil will come out and then you'll have an oil leak externally up here. So that's not great. Okay, now let's go ahead and plug this in. Make sure it locks, secure the harness if you have to remove it, and now you just would do the same to the rest of the cylinders if needed. Before we get the engine cover on, I'm going to go ahead and pull the oil fill cap, and then we have this hose over here that needs to be connected. So slide it on almost kind of into position. Reconnect your hose. had a hose clamp. Don't forget to put that on. Line it up with the throttle body. Once it lines up, you'll be able to press it on all the way. Make sure that this lines up. Next, press it onto the back and then put on your oil fill cap. That way no debris can potentially make its way in there. Snug up the hose clamp on the throttle body. Don't over tighten it, but do make sure that it is nice and snug. Okay, and snug this one up over here. Perfect.